2018, my uncle, my mother's brother, who is a justice. I believe it was 2018, my uncle, who is a justice in New York City. Okay. Organized in the New York Supreme Court building on Yom HaShoah, candlelighting. And a memorial, 6 candles, and my grandmother was flown out from Florida to light a candle, and other family members, including my uncle and cousins, were those who lit the candles. And he published something in the New York Law Journal, and later on it's going to be a book called the Holocaust Houdinis. I often call it the Holocaust Hooligans, but it's really the Houdinis, named after the famous magician who was famed for causing himself and other people to disappear miraculously. So this is a story. He wrote stories about members of the family, his parents, my grandparents, and other members of the family, and how on each occasion they were lucky enough to survive. So I'm going to read some, and I'll go out and tell some of the stories for the little time that I do have. It wasn't mere bigotry or prejudice or anti-Semitism or racism. It was genocide. More dedicated were the Nazis and their collaborators to exterminating Europe's 9 million Jews than they were to winning World War II. Given their effort to rob them, enslave, and annihilate the Jewish people, less surprising is it that 6 million Jews died, that 3 million Jews lived. Every survivor suffered unspeakable horrors from 1933 through 1945. No survivor fully recovered. The survivors must be honored for who they were, for their will to live, for what they went through, and for how bravely they endured. This is the story, much of it a secret until now, of 2 Central European Holocaust survivors and their family members who lived and died, my 2 grandparents. My grandmother's name is Irene Lebovits, and she lives in Florida, and she is the last remaining sibling. 2 of her brothers and both of her parents were murdered in Auschwitz. 2 of her brothers were burned to death in a synagogue that was lit on fire, not in Auschwitz, but before in Hungary. In the book "In the Night" by Elie Wiesel, I remember I was in 9th grade, and it was not recommended. It was compulsory reading in my course in 9th grade, and I just remember his description of the cattle cars and going from Hungary, a 3-day journey in the cattle cars, and he goes in full description what that was like for members of his family. And that image stuck in my mind forever until I read my uncle's story. And every year he comes out with more and more information. The amount of research that he's been doing on my family is unbelievable. And my family made that journey as well, 3 days on the cattle carts. My grandmother's sister met her husband, fell in love, met her husband on that cattle car. Survived, they both survived. When my grandmother arrived, my great-grandparents were taken from their home and put into ghettos, and then they went earlier to Auschwitz than their children. And when they arrived, they were basically a few years later, did my grandmother arrive with her 2 sisters. And 2 brothers were already killed, and another brother was taken elsewhere and put into camps. And when my grandmother arrived to Auschwitz, it's pretty clear it could have been that somebody had approached my grandmother, and because they smelt this this horrible smell. And I mean, it's known that on the day that she arrived, her parents were being cremated. One was gassed, one was cremated on the day that she arrived. At one point, my grandmother she was the youngest, and she had two older sisters. They both survived. They were in Auschwitz, and at one time, it was Dr. Mengele himself who told my grandmother to split away from her two older sisters. And he had this rod, and he would beat the people if they did not comply, or if they made some noise. My grandmother made some noise, but because she was young and beautiful, she says it's because she had blonde hair and blue eyes, looked like a beautiful Aryan girl. She was saved, and she was allowed to go with her sisters. So one of the sisters remained in Auschwitz, and the others went to a factory to make rockets. And they would sabotage all the rockets. They would sabotage all of the makings of the rockets so that they would not work. Duds, making duds out of these. So my grandmother's sister, her oldest sister was also in Auschwitz, and Mengele went to her and kicked her and sent her to the gas chamber directly, and then there was no room there, so she had to leave the gas chamber, and her life was saved. Another cousin, Jack Steinmetz from Toronto, he told me this story, and it's also written, that in Auschwitz he was sent, I'm not sure by Dr. Mengele or somebody else, he was sent to the gas chamber, and there was he told me that there was someone approached him saying that we have to take out the garbage or something like that, and his life was spared as well. So my grandfather's stories of how he escaped, it's really like the Houdinis, like really miraculously escaping. I'll read a little bit. I'm not sure how much. So I'll read a little bit. In 1922, Eugene, my grandfather's family, moved from Komiat in the newly formed Czechoslovakia to Satmar in northern Transylvania, Romania, because Benjamin Lebovits, Eugene's grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, was murdered by two Ukrainian brothers who owed him money. Everyone knew it. The authorities did nothing. Everyone knew who did it, but no one did anything. So he had to escape, and he went to Satmar. The Hungarians retook Satmar from the Romanians in 1940 in a deal Hitler imposed on Romania. Eugene was drafted into the Hungarian labor battalions in October 1942. It was a slave labor enforced by military discipline. He heard that his battalion was going to the Eastern Front. No Jew went there. Whoever went there was heard from again. Eugene escaped in September 1943. He was lucky. The German and Hungarian armies used the Jewish battalion slaves as human minesweepers. Two of Eugene's brothers, Dr. Arnold Mermelstein, a lawyer, and Dr. Ernest Mermelstein, a dentist, both battalion slaves, lived through the mines but perished on the Eastern Front when the Nazi SS or the Hungarians locked them inside a barn and burned it down. Arnold and Ernest were married. Their spouses, Itu and Rochel, survived the camps and moved respectively to Israel and Canada after the war. I'm going to just conclude by reading, by showing one thing, by telling one story. Just before the war, when my great-grandparents they left earlier, and they were taken out of their homes, put into the ghettos, they took some of their silver and they brought it to their entrusted neighbors. And silver, I'm meaning candlesticks and a talus that had a silver atara. Brought it to their entrusted non-Jewish neighbors, and they actually buried it. My sister received the candlelights, the candelebrums, which is actually photographed in this picture. My sister has it in Montreal. My sister is named after her great-grandmother, named Tova, and I am named after my great-grandfather, named Ludwig in English, or Solomon Leib in Yiddish. And my great-uncle went back to the house after the war, and he retrieved these items. The candelabrum my sister got, and this is the atara. Of course, the talit was all eaten alive. I mean, sorry for the eaten up or ruined, but this is the silver atara that was given to me by my grandmother. Beautifully designed with Magen Davids all over. I'll just conclude. Despite the evil they witnessed, Irene and Eugene always looked for the good in people. They were defiant towards their German and Hungarian fascist tormentors. Otherwise, they're optimistic and resilient. In their hearts was love, never hate. They were filled with character and courage and heroism, more than luck and smarts. That's how they survived the Holocaust and the years that followed.